The UK is facing difficult economic conditions with sluggish GDP growth and inflation at 8%. But Prime Minister Rishi Sunak recently found reason for optimism with the opening of a new business in London, venture firm Andreessen Horowitz's first international office. The firm's new UK outpost will focus on crypto startups, a bet that the British government will offer kinder regulation than the US. Prime Minister Sunak described the new office as, quote, another huge vote of confidence in the UK. He later added, quote, as we cement the UK's place as a science and tech superpower, we must embrace new innovations like Web3 powered by blockchain technology. Sunak then went on to say, that's why I'm thrilled world-leading investor Andreessen Horowitz has decided to open their first international office in the UK. So, Scott, a big deal for Andreessen Horowitz, apparently a pretty big deal for the Prime Minister too. Do you have any thoughts on this move?
I feel as if the way I would summarize this is the incredible shrinking United Kingdom. Mm-hmm. Can you imagine the president or President Biden announcing and making a big deal around, I don't know, Naspers, or I don't know who the biggest hedge fund in Europe is, opening a headquarters in New York? He wouldn't care. He wouldn't. I mean, it just strikes me, when I read it, it made me just feel sort of bummed about the United Kingdom, that this is the best they can talk about. This is their lead story. Hey, a VC's moving here. I mean, I'd be curious to know, maybe you know this, like how many employees, how many people are actually moving here? What is it, 50 or 100? What are your thoughts?
Well, so for one, I mean, Andreessen Horowitz has around 500 employees. So I don't know, assume like 10% of them move. That's 50 people that he's celebrating. But yeah, I agree. And
so why didn't we get an announcement when I opened L2 in London? We had as many people here.
Exactly.
Prime Minister.
Exactly. Well, I think the main thing that you mentioned, that the UK's economic situation is bad. It's really bad. I mean, 8.7% inflation, that's one of the highest in Europe. It's barely up from a year ago when it was 9%. Plus, you've got really low unemployment, wages still rising. It's sort of the worst of both worlds when it comes to inflation. And then the other thing that I saw recently is that the yields on short-term gilts, and that's the UK's equivalent of a treasury, the yields on those gilts have exploded in the past few months. In other words, investors are pricing in the fact that interest rates will have to keep rising. And I don't know if you remember, in September, we discussed those gilt yields after Liz Truss announced her mini budget, which was basically an economic disaster. It tanked the UK economy and sent yields soaring. So currently, the yield on short-term gilts is higher than they were in September. So it's just a disaster. And then you look at the UK more generally. Since the pandemic, the UK has shrunk. The UK's economy, its GDP has shrunk 0.5%. It's the only major economy in Europe to do that. Tech investment is down almost 60%. And then there's this crazy stat about the IPO market. 7 of 10 UK IPOs in the past decade have lost money. That is, the stock is now trading below the IPO issuance price. So yeah, you have an economy that's basically burying its own grave. And then the Prime Minister comes out and proudly announces that this VC firm with a pretty ubiquitous reputation for backing some of the biggest grifts of all time is opening an office in London. And then he calls it a huge vote of confidence. I agreed. I can't think of a smaller and worse vote of confidence than this.
In addition, Andreessen Horowitz has raised about $8 billion across 4, get this, crypto funds.
Yeah.
And so I would imagine, just as the UK had a massive inflow of capital after they passed very strong private property laws that basically said, are you a war criminal in Africa with a lot of money? Are you a Russian oligarch with billions?
Yep.
This is your new home. Yep. We love you. Welcome to London. And to be fair, I think it's been great for London. I've been coming to London 1 to 4 times a year for 50 years. I used to come here as a little boy, and it's gone through a multi-trillion-dollar facelift over the last 50 years. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure it's been because of British innovation. I think the innovation has been creating a great culture, an amazing city, really strong education system. So I guess you could argue that's innovation. But basically, they've attracted, billionaires have kind of 2 things in common, or 1 thing in common. They own homes in New York and London, and they bring their money in. because their money is safe in London. No one's, it's kind of out of the reach of people, and also it has good food here and a nice environment, a progressive culture. But is there really any underlying innovation here? And again, this feels a little bit like, what was that book, Butler to the World, UK? And that is, they've said, oh, regulation got you down in the US? Come to London. Wink, wink. We'll be more hands off in terms of your pump and dump crypto schemes.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that's what we wrote about last year when we were talking about, you wrote that post, WASH, for No Mercy, No Malice. And yeah, London has it all. It's got lax financial regulation. It's got the lowest corporate tax rate in the G7. They have pretty aggressive tax credits, protections on trusts. And we brought up this historical example, which is that in the 1700s, the king introduced this law called the non-domicile tax system, which basically said that anyone living in the UK whose quote unquote real home is abroad doesn't have to pay taxes. And that still exists today. And the prime minister's wife is a non-dom. She recently had to revoke that status because there was so much controversy over it. But she's the heiress of an Indian billionaire whose real home was in India, never had to pay taxes. So yeah, I think that's exactly what's going on here. The only thing that I would offer that I'd like to get your take on is, the Mayor Suarez of Miami, he sort of did this play and it kind of worked. Mm-hmm. He said, bring low regulation here, low taxes, bring in all the tech, bring in all the crypto people, and people moved there, and it did sort of jumpstart the economy. So do you think that it's reasonable for Rishi Sunak to be basically doing the same play?
Yeah, look, trying to attract companies and capital, good for him. It just strikes me that it's pretty desperate when you're talking about someone bringing over 50 jobs. It just, a bunch of rich white dudes from, if they're venture capitalists, chances are they're from Stanford or Harvard, and there's 50 of them, and the prime minister's announced. I just made me feel, it's just too bad for London. And also London, and similar to the U.S., you talked about Florida and Miami. It's sunshine and low taxes. I don't think it's a focus on an industry. I think the crypto bro movement in Miami has probably backfired on the Miami brand.
Right.
Because it just comes across as sketchy. There's a certain kind of bro-y, too much or too little testosterone feel to all of it. And I don't think it's been good. I don't think over the long run, it might have been a short-term kind of sugar high, but I don't think Miami attracting crypto has done it any favors. Being a business, or perceived as a business-friendly state with 0 state federal taxes, which, by the way, they get back a lot of it as a Florida homeowner, and in real estate taxes, my taxes on my home are I think over 2% a year of its assessed value.
Right.
But sunshine and low taxes have been the primary migration forces in the U.S., and that is people from California and New York have moved to Texas and Florida, respectively. But I think when all's said and done, crypto, Jesus fucking Christ, can we just stop talking about crypto? Let's talk about a market that's bigger, like pastel lampshades or something. Who cares? Who cares?
I agree. I totally agree. But it's tough when the prime minister of a G7 nation is touting it as the future, when I thought we had all agreed that it was slightly behind us.
Yeah, and I like him. I like the prime minister. He strikes me as a reasonable, smart man. I hope he does well, and I realize that politics over here are different, but with a parliamentary system. But I think he's been actually a steady hand. But yeah, this one made no sense. There's this guy named Patty Haverson who was the kind of head of comms for the palace, and now runs this very successful communications firm here in London. And I just would imagine that he's a really bright guy, really a blue flame thinker. I can't imagine if he were working at 10 Downing or whatever the number is. Right. Is it 10 Downing?
It's 10, yeah.
I can't imagine if he was working at 10 Downing, he would have let him put out this press release. It'd be like, okay, boss.
Yeah.
Okay. This is good for them, makes you look small.
Right. Yeah, I don't know if you saw, but on the door of 10 Downing Street, the comms department installed all these other zeros and ones to be like a binary code message. We're now the tech hub. What do you think of that as a parliamentary comms strategy?
Well, I'm not sure there's a ton of wood behind that arrow. Actually, the UK has raised a lot of money for fintech companies.
Right.
Its unicorns have a greater market capitalization than any nation in Europe, including double that of Germany. So you got to give it. London and the UK have been friendly and successful around fintech companies. So I don't know. It feels a little bit gimmicky.
Yeah.
Whatever. I can't see the White House, putting windmills in its front lawn or paper mache windmills to say we're the new renewable capital. Maybe. Who knows?